and all that good stuff. We are live here with Mr. Zachary Rosenberg. Thank you very much, Zach, for joining us today. So much appreciated, man. For everybody that has yet to read your book, that might also be wondering, well, what is Jewish horror? How would you define that to somebody that's ignorant through perhaps no fault of their own as to what Jewish representation actually is in horror?
So that's a really interesting question, Rick. I'm really glad you asked that. When I was writing the long Shalom and Hunger's as Old as This Land, I think Jewish horror can take on several forms. There is kind of the idea of, is anything written by a Jewish person Jewish horror by itself? Because you have stuff by, sorry, this is where I kind of put my scholar research hat on. Ira Levine, who wrote The Stepford Wives and Boys from Brazil and Rosemary's Baby, is that necessarily Jewish horror, even though he's not drawing upon Jewish religion? And I think limiting it just by the religion, when it's a little hard to define, being Jewish for a lot of people, because some people have it into their heads that being Jewish is just, oh, the religion, when it's really so much more. When we say being Jewish, to a lot of us, that it is a ethno-religion. It is not only the beliefs and the practices, it is also a peoplehood and a culture. There's a lot of Jewish people who I know who are not practicing but still consider themselves Jewish, who are atheist and Jewish. So, and there are so many different kinds of different cultures among the different aspects of the Jewish people. You have Ashkenazi Jews, Sephardic Jews, Mizrahi Jews, Beta Israel, the Beta Israel from Central Africa and Zimbabwe and Ethiopia. So really, when we're defining it, I think the first aspect of it is it needs to be written by Jewish people. There's a lot of Jewish horror. I'm not saying non-Jewish people can't do it, because there's a lot out there about golems or Dybbuk, which are basically Jewish ghosts in a sense. But when I'm talking about Jewish horror, my personal definition is writing from a perspective of Jewish people, Jewish history, and or Jewish folklore. One way that Long Shalom differs from Hunger's doesn't really involve any Jewish folklore, but it does involve Jewish history, themes, and Jewish characters, and how that Jewish aspect informs things. Because it's very easy, I think, for non-Jewish people, or even for Jewish people at times, going by something like Rosemary's Baby, to kind of get tied up with a more Christian or majoritarian view of what the horror system is. Because Rosemary's Baby, what does it involve? A woman having her agency taken from her and being impregnated by the devil, where in Judaism there isn't kind of the traditional Christian satanic figure.
Right.
On the other hand, something from Ira Levine that I would consider far more Jewish horror in construction is something like Boys from Brazil, which is closer to science fiction horror, but it involves an escaped Dr. Mengele trying to recreate a Hitler from various clones of Hitler that he's sown all over the world so he can create a new Führer. And that is very much speaks to the Jewish fear of, after World War II, for a long time, Jewish horror was pretty much only Nazis. It was escaped Nazis and Nazi plots and Nazi occultism. And it's very easy to see why. Sure. The Holocaust is, Josh Mallerman made a great point in an interview with Becky Spratford, I think last year, that, you see one Dybbuk story for every 99 Holocaust stories. And it's not that those aren't important stories, but there's so much else you can do. There's just so much else to the culture. It really wasn't until 1982 where I think the most mainstream version of Jewish horror is the book The Tribe by Barry Wood, where that was re-released from the Valancourt Paperbacks from Hellline, that really deals with Jewish culture and folklore and gets into it. I'm not a huge fan of it myself for various reasons, but I kind of respect it in that culture. I would argue the Twilight Zone in a lot of cases gets into Jewish horror, even if it doesn't feature Jewish people front and center often, but Serling himself was Jewish, and there's a lot dealing with Nazism, and he was one of the first people to really tackle the Holocaust and Hitler in popular culture, and especially speculative fiction. And unfortunately, there's a lot of like I brought up in my essay. There's a book that was really impactful on me called The Keep by F. Paul Wilson,
Hmm.
which doesn't which F. Paul Wilson is not Jewish, but he really
Right.
does feature Jewish characters and kind of front and center in World War II who are kind of unapologetically Jewish. And kind of the villain's plot is to trick a Jewish professor by pretending to be repulsed by the cross while he's pretending to be a vampire, which is an interesting examination of it because the villain is not a vampire. He's only pretending to be one. The cross has no power over him whatsoever. But
Right.
he's making the professor doubt his culture by pretending it repulses him. And that was such an interesting examination of the biases at the heart of vampire fiction and horror that you don't often see represented, and got me thinking because you always see the vampire repulsed by a cross.
Yeah.
That's true in Dracula because it represents, the quote unquote the one truth.
Right.
You never see the vampire repulsed by a Jewish star unless, maybe they take it from the instance that, that it's faith itself that repulses them and not necessarily the holy symbol. And that kind of carries over into a lot of things. I remember there was a vampire movie, I think it was Dracula 2000, when Gerard Butler, where the revelation is Dracula is Judas, who betrayed the savior, and that's why he doesn't like silver and crosses. And it's like, okay, that means the evil bloodsucker is Jewish. And that's kind of the bias that nobody really thinks about. It's when they incorporate that stuff, and it's there because it's there, and they don't realize how that comes across to, Jewish culture and Jewish people when you think about it. I know I'm talking a lot right now, but
no, please do.
When I'm talking about Jewish horror, there's so much folklore that doesn't get used. There's so much history that doesn't get used, and kind of what I wanted to do was get in there and use more of that history. Like, not to say that it doesn't get used completely. There's people who are doing a great job. John Baldisberger is one who's amazing. Elena Gomel, Brenda Tolian, everyone who put together the Jewish Book of Horror, in a sense. But you have so much of that history that's not necessarily used. And one of my all-time favorite horror books is Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman. And I'm not giving any shade to Christopher Buehlman. I think this is a fantastic horror novel that everyone should read. It's set in medieval times, but there's one kind of plot line that involves the persecution of the Jews, and there aren't really any Jewish characters. It just kind of uses them as props to advance the schemes of the demons and the villain. And that kind of got me thinking, like, why are Jewish people just props in these stories? Why is the pain and suffering of Jewish persecution and why is that just window dressing for Christian characters and Christian worldview? And why aren't we writing our own stories? And kind of a big thing for that for me was which is the Vigil, which I consider a landmark in Jewish horror, because it was not necessarily a major film, but it was one of the very few I've seen by a Jewish director, with a Jewish cast, from Jewish folklore and Jewish. There's so much I could say about this movie that I wouldn't have time for right now. But it's a terrific film. And I talked about The Possession, The Unborn, and those are films I just despise. I will give The Unborn credit. It does do the Dybbuk legend. It is from a Jewish director and writer by David Goyer. It is not what I would call a good movie. It is almost a completely Gentile cast. It never even uses the word Jewish once, I think, in that entire film, even though it uses the Holocaust as kind of just a cheap backdrop. I do not consider it. But it is better than I would argue than The Possession, which is, I just think, irredeemable, which has embedded the idea of the Dybbuk box in public consciousness, which I am not a fan of because I consider it a very offensive and incorrect stereotype, which basically mangles Jewish folklore, all because some guy wanted to sell something on eBay and it went viral, and now you will just see Dybbuk boxes all over the place, which is very unfortunate. And there are I think it's making more of a comeback now. You're seeing more people writing it unapologetically. You're seeing more films from it. There was Attachment, which came out recently, which I know some of the key cast was Jewish. I'm not sure about the director. I don't think he was, but it is a way, I think, of how to approach the story of the Dybbuk with a great deal of respect, and that is something I really admire. Also, Noah Stegan's Blood Relative, which is about a Jewish vampire who discovers he is a father, and he has a teenage daughter he never knew about, and it's all how he navigates the world. And I felt that was a very good one, too. By contrast, there's movies like Lullaby and The Offering, which I consider like a little mediocre, which is kind of just using the Jewish stuff as backdrops and not really doing the mythology well or with any sensitivity, and also making some errors along the way. So, that's really a whole lot. But to kind of narrow it down back to the question,
Sure.
I think it's really, Jewish characters, Jewish folklore, and history, and how that is approached through the lens of Jewish themes.
That is fascinating. This is exactly why I want to talk to you about this, because, exactly like you said, I think that goes really without saying. We see it everywhere that, for the most part, you see, Jewish characters are ultimately, a backdrop as, symbolism for victimization, when there's so much more to it than that. There's this amazing culture. And then on the other end of it, I don't know. Obviously, like I remember there was that Friends episode as well, where I think you had Ross, where he was trying to talk, he wanted to share, his Jewish culture with his son, and he came and dressed in as an armadillo. And, so it's like, these are representations in common Jewish, storytelling. And it's not fair, and it's not right. And it's so minimalistic that it makes people like me wonder, at almost 50 years old, thinking, well, what is Jewish for? So that should, and I think the thing that I really enjoyed too about the Law and Shalom is that throughout all of it, the Jewish history and the Jewish culture within those characters that you depict in there, it's not, I don't want to use, because it sounds very harsh to say it doesn't feel like it's shoved down our throats, although I think there are certain things that really do need to be shoved down our throats, because clearly we're not getting it. At the same time, it's so natural that it just happens to be about Jewish characters, where nobody in the story is necessarily waving, a flag and saying, hey, I'm Jewish, look at me, pay attention to me. It's just, it comes across so naturally, and it gives us a chance to feel like we really are part of these stories, and we're part of the everyday living and the everyday trials and tribulations, and that I think we can all relate to, where we have a belief system that we're constantly questioning. Well, it's the same thing in these stories. It just happens to be about their constant question, their faith and their Jewish culture and what it really means to them. And I think it's such a beautiful backdrop in your storytelling.
Yeah, and I also want to, also touch on that. There is also a tendency when you have Jewish characters. You have the Woody Allen types, who are the very, I consider Woody Allen a very narcissistic filmmaker in a sense. I'm not saying much good about Woody Allen, believe me.
Sure.
This is kind of he kind of cemented the vision of the Jewish character in mainstream culture as the neurotic, the nebbish, and I consider that a very kind of narcissistic lens to view it through, when his characters are also always ending up with success. They end up with all the women. They're kind of like loved for their for these flaws in a sense, when it's the opposite of vulnerability. It's presenting this kind of like very full, it cemented this view of Jewish characters as not only victims, but like neurotic and anxious, and and even at also at times greedy and grasping. One thing I wanted to do with my works was give a new view to Jewish characters. Like, how can they be? Like, I think, from the Long Shalom, you have Alan Aldenberg, and Alan is very much in the realm of the Philip Marlowe and the the Sam Spade. He's the hard-boiled drug detective, and he's very flawed. He's not what I would describe as a spotless person at all. He has a history.
No way.
Has a history with the mob. He's he's got bills to pay, and I was trying to do that in a sense. I wasn't touching on the stereotype of just the greedy Jew. But he is someone with a darker backstory. Anti-Semitism has definitely informed his life. He is someone who has been through, violence and war, and he's worked for the mob. And yeah, there were Jewish, there was the Jewish mob at the time. There was, Arnold Rothstein was a very real historical figure, and he was a major player in the rising prominence of organized crime.
Huge.
But Alan is also, he's brave, he's resourceful, he's clever. He doesn't adhere to a lot of these traditional stereotypes. He's not even devoutly Jewish at first, but he's still Jewish. It still informs him. It's still a huge part of his worldview. And I think I want to portray characters who are all across the spectrum, Jews who are not perfect, and Jews who are, who are ruthless and dangerous, and people who are kind of, badass in a sense. Take one of characters like Rutger Hauer from Flesh and Blood to give an idea of, not totally like that. That's probably more villainous than I would want to go the lead character, to be honest. But characters like that, and what if they were Jewish? People who have been kind of trod on by the world, and keep going and keep swinging. Hunger's as old as this land. My main characters, Esther and Siobhan. Siobhan is a Jewish convert. Esther is half Jewish, half Creek in the American Old West, which is a very hard time. How does it inform them? How does it affect their lives? How does it how do they keep going? And that was all stuff I really wanted to get across, and also characters I wanted to write about. People who are not just typical stereotypes, present this whole spectrum of Jewishness and Judaism.
Yeah, beautiful. And and you absolutely nailed that too, and I really enjoyed that. And it's really cool too, because in a sense, as a reader, I found that you can almost get as much out of the book as you wanted to. So you could just read it as a straight ahead story, and it's a fantastic, they're fantastic stories. But if you wanted to really dive into it and truly understand what the Jewish culture is all about, and how, the intricacies, and how it kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess, it blends in with just with everyday stuff, and, specifically with horror, you could do that too. And it was funny because as I'm reading this, I was thinking, man, I hope that there's a glossary, because I really want to understand what these words are. And they're words that I've certainly heard in everyday language, but I wasn't sure what they necessarily meant. And lo and behold, right at the end of it, you've got a glossary of the terms, which is awesome. So I love that. I'm like, oh, that's great.
I give two people credit for that. My publisher, Wayland, from Off Limits, he had the idea of a glossary for Gentiles, which I thought was great. And my aunt had the idea to call it the Index.
Yep.
So,
those people. Yeah, no, it was cool because it gave me a chance to make it more of a, an educational experience as well, which is what I was really looking forward to.
Which I'm very, very happy about. And it really becomes interesting when you kind of examine how Jewish rep goes from old school horror, or even it's not, horror has not been a genre that was very good to the Jews for a very long time.
Right.
I love swords and sorcery stuff, but Robert E. Howard was very anti-Semitic, and that definitely came across in his writing sometimes. Bram Stoker was anti-Semitic, and that came across you just have a random Jewish character who's a greedy little hairy guy who gets bribed by the heroes.
Yeah.
And that is something that I think I was asking recently, hey, is there any Jewish swords and sorcery? It's well, maybe there's 5 stories over the course of 90 years with how close that genre spread. And that kind of makes you think. It's wow, that's really not great.
No, it isn't. And why do you think that is exactly? I mean, is it just people don't want to touch that because regarding the Holocaust, and they're afraid of misrepresentation? Is it just the way that we kind of are still looking at the Jewish culture to this day? Why do you think that is? I mean, there's a lot of Jewish people out there. They're a major part of the population. Yeah. So why don't we think we see more submissions from them, like yourself?
I think it's interesting. I think it's a vicious cycle in a sense that people get into their heads that we don't want to see we just think Jews are only a religion. We don't really see them as a people. We have those we don't see them as a minority who needs representation in a sense, and that kind of leads into a vicious cycle when so much Jewish stuff gets rejected. that Jewish people kind of get into their heads that, they're not going to be successful if they're writing their own culture, or they're not going to be successful if they're doing their stuff. And that just gets, like I said, it just feeds into it like a self-effacing loop that even Jewish people writing Jewish characters and culture doesn't get much play. Where I think even a lot of well-meaning people reinforce those systemic barriers without realizing it, or they look at it like there's only a certain amount they can accept, and they don't really see it as vital that Jewish people get that representation. And I think that there's been improvements on that. I certainly think there's more coming out, like the Jewish Book of Horror and John Baltisberger's Madness Heart Press. He did an anthology called By the Book, of the Book, which I believe was the first anthology of straight Jewish horror with his publisher, Madness Heart Press. I think there's more that's coming out than ever, but there's still a really long way to go. I think you have like major publications that very rarely, or if ever, publish Jewish stuff, and I just kind of want them. So I want Jewish people to like be submitting in greater numbers. I want to say like, hey, we do need like. There's one of my favorite writers, Richard Dansky. He has a great trilogy. He has some great short stories called the Red Palash stories, which are about a Jewish pirate rabbi going through horror adventures, which is total swords and sorcery stuff. And I think
awesome.
there's really they're fantastic. You can listen to one on Pseudopod right now. There's another in the Jewish Book of Horror. Well, actually, that's the same one. I think another's coming out in Pseudopod later this year. But he just put out a collection with all three of them in there, and I'm just like, people need to go and read this. Like, read it, enjoy it. Say you want more of it. Champion Jewish people who are doing it. Obviously, we need every minor. We need so much more representation out there on the market right now. I want to see more of multiple different kinds of cultures. I think it's still a very white Gentile industry, unfortunately. And nothing against a lot of white Gentiles. They write some of my favorite. They write some of my favorite stuff. One of the biggest inspirations for Long Shalom in the cosmic horror aspect was Laird Barron, who I have nothing but good things to say about. Yeah. And I just want there to be a world where Laird Barron and and a bunch of Jewish writers too can all have their stories out there successfully on the market.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic, and I think you really nailed it too. And I'm just as responsible for this sort of ignorance as well. Where, when you do look at the Jewish culture, you look at it as a Jewish religion first, culture second. I mean, even going back to my, might have been a bit of a crass sample, but regarding that Friends episode where, I mean, you've got, one of the main characters in the show, Ross, and you hardly ever hear about his culture. The only real thing that you hear about that in my memory that stands out is regarding Hanukkah, and talking about the religious aspect, trying to teach religious aspect to his son. But it's like, okay, well, we're all the other cultures and the folklore stories and, and all that kind of stuff. And you don't see that. So I think that maybe a lot of folks are hesitant to read, Jewish horror because they think, oh, it's just going to be another religion that's kind of jammed down our throats, when it's not. It's so much more. There's so much folk story history that is involved with that as well. And if you don't mind, Zach, I do want to ask you about that too. With such a rich culture, what is it about the Golem that you found was, such a great, I don't know if I want to call it a backdrop, but certainly a great portion of your culture to talk about with the Law and Shalom, when there's so much else you could have picked from? What was it about the Golem that you felt fit really well for this particular story?
So the Golem is something very interesting, and that is an example of Jewish culture that has permeated so much without people necessarily knowing it, and I've seen it so misused at times.
Me too. Yeah, I was surprised to see it here.
And it's so interesting because, that was something I think that's just used as just a synonym for construct. Let's say, I love Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop, but what is Golem is just something that is used as a thing there. Like, you have blood golems and iron golems, and it's just it's becoming pop culture. Just the idea of like I said, a living construct made of so and so. And I take some liberties myself with it. In Jewish religion, Jewish folklore, golems are clay made flesh rather than just creatures of iron or creatures of just iron or or metal.
Okay.
So thing that really interested me there was kind of a commentary on appropriation in there, because the villains are forcing Jewish people to use the golems for their benefit.
Yeah.
And also, I really like golems, I admit. I really think it's a really cool concept. I have several stories out with golems right now. There's one that's out and sees the press called The Golem's Joy, which takes place from the perspective of a golem, of the Golem of Prague, which is a very famous Jewish folktale. Which I had a lot of fun writing. I did a kind of like a cyberpunk golem in Dark Matter magazine called Savior in Steel. And I just really, really, really enjoy using the golems, and I felt it was kind of appropriate. So on one hand, I just loved using them, but also it was kind of like the commentary on that appropriation of the villains using them and the Jewish people kind of taking them back.
That was pretty awesome. Yeah, I like that.
Thank you.
Perfect. And if I can talk to you a little bit too, Zach, about I guess kind of the nuts and bolts. So I always think it takes a lot of balls, especially as a new author, to not just put out one debut book, but two of them pretty much almost back to back. Was there a specific purpose that you had in doing that? I mean, obviously you weren't, maybe you weren't one by day, one by night, they all came together at the same time, or was there kind of a strategy that you had, or did you just think, you know what, let's just fire off on literally both cylinders and get these guys out here and see which ones people respond to best? And how did that work out? I mean, they're both great stories.
In all honesty, that was really just, I think, more of a coincidence than anything. Hungers was scheduled originally, and then really from Hungers, it just kind of worked out that way with publishing schedules.
Okay.
So it was like, okay, 1 month here, 1 month there, let's do this. And I signed for Hungers last summer, and I got I did the pulp pitch to Off Limits when they had that open around.
Yes.
I want to say October-ish. So I can't remember, and they loved it. So I was like, I will write it, and I wrote it quickly, and they're like, we love it, we want to publish it. So I'm like, okay, let's do it. And
That is awesome.
Our schedule is June. I was like, sounds great.
Yeah, you never say no. There's only one answer.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And that's gotta be exhausting, I would think, too, is it, to try to be able to market both of them? And I mean, obviously you've got the two different publishing houses that are doing their thing, but let's face it, a lot of it still relies on, the author themselves kind of pushing that stuff. But have you found that that's kind of a little bit of a yin and yang sort of thing, where you're trying to figure out a balance between the two?
That's interesting. Sometimes, you got to grab the bull by the horns when it comes. Like, one of my publishers, they're very big on, like, yeah, pitch us. Absolutely freaking pitch us. So, the worst we can say is no. Some publishers, I think, are a little more resistant to it. Some of the best experience I've had is basically just kind of like, hey, you know what? You like my stuff? Well, I have this if you're interested. And it can be like, oh, we're not open to that right now, but keep an eye on this, or heck yeah, send it my way. And sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. I've gotten passes on some of those, just being like, hey, I really like this, but it's just not what I'm looking for right now. No harm, no foul. Or hey, yeah, I love this, and let's talk about it. And that's kind of what I have some stuff coming out next year that's like like one of my big ones. One of my favorite publishers I work with right now is Darklit Press. I'm not saying, that's no shade to Off Limits and Break Escape. They're all amazing. They're wealthy. So that started off, and they were announcing like, oh, hey, we're doing a line of pirate horror books. I was like, hey guys, I have a Jewish pirate horror I've been thinking about. Are you interested? They're like, you were interested? Like, talk to us about this. And I'm like, hey, I'm talking to you about this. And they're like, hey, we really like your idea. We want to sign for it. And now that's led to, more opportunity. And now, I have a great relationship with them. So, and sometimes you send a book or story in, and it is just a matter of, hey, through this open call, we love this and we want to take it. I had a great time working with Dark Matter magazine, and that just happened, me sending it through the just the general submission portal. And they love that story and they're publishing it. And they did publish it, and that actually led to very, very close friendship with one of their editors now, who I consider a fantastic friend, who was actually my first reader on that story. That was how we first
that's
met.
great. That's super cool. What a
Yeah,
cool full circle story that is.
you really just can't ever tell what'll happen. Like sometimes you just got to send it in and hope for the best. There was one time they didn't know me from anyone, but I sent in a story to Diet Milk Magazine, which was a Jewish Gothic, and I kind of wrote to them saying,
Okay.
guys, I know this is a little longer than you usually like. This was written for an anthology call that has been like really quiet for like 6 months now. I don't really have a home for it. You don't have to pay me the full amount, which just mind considering it. And they're like, you know what? We'll make an exception. Send it to us. And now they're like, hey, you know what? We love the story so much. How would you like to do a sequel and serialize it?
Wow, that's incredible.
And I'm like, yeah, I would like to do that. Now, like, Hateris, their editor, is I would consider a friend right now. Just really, really great people. And I sent him the second volume of that serial, and that wouldn't have happened. That was just like a stab in the dark.
Wow. I absolutely love stories like this. I think that's incredible, and I think that for everybody watching this right now or listening to it, depending on how you get your your best podcast, I love that. So there's obviously a lot that people can take from this too. It's never be afraid to kind of jump in there with both feet and ask and
Yes.
to inquire before you just assume that they probably wouldn't want this, or what are the chances. It sounds like who cares what the chances are, go for it anyways. And then of course, never be afraid to say yes.
Right, exactly. Like, and sometimes it's just a matter of sending your work on the submission portal. They might like it, they might not, but also, but if it gets in and like, maybe say, hey, if you're interested in this, maybe you'd be interested in that too, stuff like that. And, I've developed some great relationships with people. And sometimes it can also be a matter of, taking a no for the moment, but realizing that may lead to a future yes. Like sometimes you run into a like, let's say you get to that final round rejection, and it says it says, oh hey, I really like this. This was a really hard decision, but I'm saying no for this reason. Send it. But please, send us another one when we're open again, or send us another. And you know what? Do it. Absolutely do it. Those are the people who remember you and they want to say yes to you. I just got a no from a place where, like I said, it's a swords and sorcery where it's like I said, there's not much to do with swords and sorcery. They said, we really love your story. It's a really hard decision. We can only accept this much. So it's like, all right, guy, you guys know that your eyes are open now. Your eyes are on me. I'm going to send in something else next time you're open. And tell myself I don't make it next time. Or I sent in the Deadlands, which is coming out in September. That took me like three or four tries, and one of them they said, Elise, the editor, she is amazing, by the way. She said, hey Zach, I love your story. It's just not quite right. I think it needs a little extra dimension. If you want to revise it, I am more than happy to consider it again.
It's a great response.
And she doesn't do that often, so I was like, you know what? I'll do that. It's really sometimes it's a matter of persistence. They're not going to give you stuff, but like no one's going to like just say like, oh hey, I know this guy and he had some stories here before. But
Right.
But the editors will remember you. They will know they like your stuff, and they'll say like, they'll be cheering for you too. Like, give us something we can say yes to, and sometimes it's just as much that way. Like, and sometimes as a minority, you have the bad rejections, the ones that make you vent in private channels. It's happened. I'm not going to put anyone on blast. I'm not going to say anything about that right now. But you gotta like keep going. Basically, it took me probably like 12 tries before I made it to fantasy and science fiction.
No kidding.
It's all a matter of just keeping going. And sometimes you can send in like 5 books before they'll say yes to the 6th one. And I have one at a place right now that I'm just waiting for them to have time to look at. I'm keeping my fingers really crossed on that one.
Yeah. Well, here's hoping too that I'm sure a lot of those initial rejections for whatever reason, where they're things that you're kind of like, okay, that's just par for the course, or well, you really suck, and they're one of the ones you vent about in private chat rooms, are probably kicking themselves now as you're kind of breaking through, and they're going to be seeing a lot more Zachary Rosenberg popping up in various publications, and that they're probably, oh man, we could have had him, but we screwed that up.
It's kind of funny. A lot of times you got to remember, like, it's not personal. They're still cheering for you. It's just a matter of, give them something else they can say yes to next time. Like, there was
Yeah.
one, I will tell the story. It's a really funny one. They accidentally rejected me twice for this anthology.
Accidentally.
Accident. Oh yeah, they sent one form rejection. They sent another form rejection on the same
Oh, jeez. Come on, guys. Once is enough.
It was funny as hell. Right now, I consider this publisher a good friend. I will support. You know what? Even like just support them, support what they do. You're all in the same boat, and there will be another chance. And this, keep going with that. Like, just keep sending them stories. There's another publisher who loves my stuff now. I made it to a last round rejection on his first one, and he was telling me stories like, that was and I got into the second one, Shakespeare Unleashed. And he was saying, he's like, hey, I rejected his story the first time. He just sent me another, and I love that one.
That's awesome. Cool. I love that. That's super inspiring.
Thank you. Yeah, it's some great advice I once heard was, it's not just talent, it's endurance.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said that better myself. I mean, just endurance, perseverance, being stubborn, a little bit insane. Like Stephen King said, it's like he once had so many rejections that the nail that the spike that he had on his wall broke, so he got himself a bigger nail to hold all the other ones.
Yeah, and sometimes it can be hard because you do run into sometimes those system failures. Those do exist, and they exist in ways a lot of people aren't aware of. And like sometimes it's just a matter of keep trying, and sometimes it's. I've seen writers who are louder about it than I am, and I really admire them.
Yeah, absolutely. Zach, this has been an absolutely amazing chat. I have no doubt that I could ask you easily to take the rest of the day off and do the same thing and chat with you all day about this, because I feel like we've literally just kind of touched the tip of the the iceberg, or in this case the Rosenberg. And I feel like there's so much more that I would love to chat with you about as well, and we have to do this again sometime. And thank you for writing more, so that we hopefully do get a chance to talk about more of this work and
thank you so much.
Your life and everything else. So
yeah, right now I have a few things coming out next year. I have a Jewish Gothic with Wicked's Gate called The Unquiet Grave, which should probably come out next summer. I have a Jewish pirate horror for Darklit Press that's coming out.
That sounds just absolutely ridiculous. That I think that's going to be great. Jewish pirate.
The editor, right? Oh, I'm so excited for that to be out. I am so ridiculously excited. I'm thinking about some sequels to Hungers and Long Shalom. I have some other stuff in the secret works right now. Some stuff that's like informally going that I can't talk about yet. I have, but yeah, no, I have ideas.
Awesome. This is exciting, and I'm glad I caught you at this point in your journey, because it sounds like you're going to be so busy that you might not have time for the little guys and these little podcasts and stuff.
Rick, I really appreciate the support. Always feel free to reach out to me. Let me just plug for the listeners. I just really also recommend checking out a lot of other great Jewish writers. John Baltusberger, Emily Ruth Verona. Elena Gomel, Brenda Tolian. There's just really so much out there. Just do some research and enrich.
Thank you. And is there anything else in parting that you feel that folks need to know about Hungers as Old as This Land, the Lawn Shalom, Jewish culture in general, as far as how it's being depicted and how it needs to be depicted in horror? The stage is yours. What do you have to say to folks as we part ways?
You know what? The thing is, what they say: two Jews, three opinions. I don't think there's one right way to do it. I would just say that the best thing you can do is seek out Jewish writers, support Jewish writers, and it's a real gap. It's one of many gaps, unfortunately, but let's try to fill it.
Excellent. Thank you very much for doing your part to fill in the gap, and I look forward to watching how you fill even more gaps in the future. And I'll make sure, of course, I put links down below too, so everybody watching this, check out the description as well, and that the pinned comment. I'll make sure that we get a link to all of your work as well, and I'll put a link in too, Zach, to the nonfiction article, because
fantastic. I really appreciate that.
You bet. And as I said in the green room, so I just found out about it myself. I'm halfway through, and I've been finding it super fascinating, and I'm going to go back and finish reading that in a moment here, and then I'll make sure I put a link in there too, so folks can enjoy that too.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rick.
You're welcome. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.